That would definitely help. Okay, I put on the record now, so we can go through what we're talking about as far as Active Directory. And Jake, I need to come back to setting up. Remind me later on, coming back up to set up a virtual in the the DOS operating system in a virtual environment. So I have to remember to do that.
I think that would be under.
Brian.
What was that?
Go ahead, Doug.
I was going to say, I think that's probably in computer management.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for those of you who have the network book, this is page 584 in the book, and it talks about access control technologies. And under here, it will talk about Active Directory, and we call active access control technologies AAA process for its authentication, access, and whatever. You think it would say all three of them here. Mm-hmm.
Hey Brian, what book is this?
This is the network book. So if you're in the network section, this is the book you will be getting. Network Plus Guide to Networks, 8th edition.
Oh, I don't have that one yet.
Okay, so you're not there yet. Okay.
What chapter?
I'm on chapter 10. Chapter 10 in the book.
All right, I'm jumping ahead. Let's do it.
Okay, so those of you that see, I find you can see I finally got my hover cam, so now I can talk about books you may not have. Mm-hmm. So directory services. So when we talk about Active Directory, it is a directory service. So in the book, it says, in order for clients to authenticate to network resources as opposed to individual devices, some sort of directory server on the network must maintain a database of account information, such as usernames, passwords, and any other authentication credentials. Often this is accomplished in Active Directory, and this would only be in a Microsoft environment where we talk about Active Directory, or something more Linux focused like Open LDAP. So we did mention that before. I think we mentioned LDAP. LDAP is the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And
Yeah,
this is the
last week or last Tuesday.
Yeah, and this is the protocol you use to access a directory. And Microsoft finally did something good.
No way.
And they made their Active Directory LDAP compatible. So in theory, you can make their directory services, which is Active Directory, you could make them work in conjunction with something like Open LDAP or Novell Directory Services, other types of directory services. So
it sounds like Microsoft is pushing towards an open source environment.
Yeah, because we know what happens when companies don't do that. Even the biggest ones can fail if they don't keep open standards. And we know Microsoft has failed at certain things like their phone and things like that.
They've been doing that gradually over time. So I expect to see it completely done here pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, they're doing more and more cooperating with the Linux environment, more interoperability with that.
They're one of the biggest Linux contributors to the kernel, actually, and a donator.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating for
Microsoft? They always have even from the beginning, from the early days.
But you know, you would always sworn that Microsoft was an enemy of that.
Well, they wanted everybody to follow their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody wanted to, like Apple and of course Linux and
right, exactly,
and any fork off of Linux.
Mm-hmm. Let me open my hover cam again a minute. It seemed to Seemed to freeze on me for a second for whatever reason. And tiny bit quirky.
Got it plugged into a 3.0 port.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do I have it? Could be.
Yeah, I mean, that may help with the locking up aspect.
Yeah, it's a little, Chick's getting used to a little bit. Oh, I got Big Tim over here.
Mike, are you typing again?
Oh, you can hear me type?
Yes.
Whoops.
It ain't no big thing, man. Stop it.
The damn Mac keyboards.
You're
What's up,
muted,
Doug?
Brian. You're muted, Brian.
How you doing, Mike?
I thought that was supposed to be silent, those Mac keyboards.
When you get too much dust under them, they start clacking away.
Well, if you get the one that I had, the 2018 series Mac Pro, if you get the dust under, the keys don't work anymore. The ones that had the butterfly keyboard, the butterfly keys. Yeah, you got to keep dust away from them, otherwise the keys will fail, which is kind of annoying.
That's whack.
So what was the big event yesterday in
Huh?
the news? Come on.
Eric Chauvin?
No, not stuff like that. Something really important that's going to matter in history.
What, Exploit Wednesday?
They found oxygen in Mars.
Close.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the helicopter thing?
water-
Yeah, and Ingenuity flew yesterday on Mars.
Oh, that.
Yeah, come on. I mean, we're
Come
talking about
on.
really, come on, we're technology guys here.
But it was flying next
Remote
Monday.
controlled drone flown on Mars.
That's
Yeah,
pretty bad.
Yeah, but it's
that is amazing, actually.
well, actually, it is 1% of the atmosphere of here. So you imagine how fast those blades have to spin.
Could you
Come on.
imagine what would happen if that thing crashed and broke one of those blades? That'd be SOL,
yeah.
man.
Yeah. The poor Martian would be, cut to pieces.
No. I'm just thinking about the drone itself.
Well, the drone wasn't there to do any experiments. The experiment was to see if the drone could fly. Come on, you know how I love drones. Anything to do with drones is going to be a big deal.
That is a big deal.
Right.
I'm just being the devil's
Right.
advocate here. I'm sorry. It's my nature.
In fact, Timmy had one of the teachers come out a couple of days ago with his DJI drone, and they flew it around the school, and I missed out on it. Darn it.
Yeah, I wish I want to see that video. I haven't looked at it yet.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
So-
they're using that thing just for scouting, right?
They're basically using it just to see if it would fly. I think they will take some pictures, but it's not going to have any real scientific value as really testing out whether you could fly a drone. And
Well-
actually, I wouldn't call it a true drone. It's a coaxial helicopter.
The two devices together acting as a team could actually help the rover navigate that much better and point it in the proper direction, I would think. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Hmm.
Okay,
All right, so let's go back to what we were here. Sorry that Tim distracted us. Mhm.
we
And
went right into Active Directory, Mike.
okay, we'll go back into Active Directory.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Mike, you were working on that yesterday, correct?
Yes.
Mhm. Okay, so while we were talking, I should have powered up these devices. So can you tell them a little bit about the funny terminology that we use as far as Active Directory? It's kind of amusing. Mike?
Not quite ringing the bell, but maybe OU?
What do you first set up when you first do the promotion?
What
Okay.
is a server?
Starts with an F.
Forest.
Forest.
Oh,
Yeah.
Forest.
Yeah, so
Forest
we
and
have
trees.
this, yeah, so we have this interesting terminology, just like when you get the register, you talk about keys. And on your hard drive, you talk about folders. In Active Directory or any directory services, we talk about organizational units and containers. And when we're first setting up, we talk about the we talk about the forest and the trees. So that is the terminology that we use. Let's see, let me see if I can open this one up. So we first have to, the very first thing we have to do when we promote a server for the very first time, we have a no forest. And we have a forest so we can have multiple trees. So if you have multiple trees and if they're in the same forest, they can share information. And an example would be if you're in one domain and you want to log into the other domain, if they're in a forest, you can share the information. You can share the logon information between domains. So you need to put them in the same forest to do that.
Like being in the same subnet, right?
Yeah, like being in the same subnet, except this we're talking about database technology now, rather than subnetting, rather than folders. So we're in a different realm, you might say, of technology. So when we log in, we're using a database. The Active Directory is a database of information. In fact, when we were setting it up yesterday, there was one of the locations, remember, it was in the, I think in the Windows system folder or something like that, where it said, where did we want to keep the, where did we want to keep the directory database exactly? And let me see if I can share my hover cam again while we're still waiting for this to boot up. I feel like Bill Gates when, you know, what was it when he was showing Windows 95 and it crashed because of the RAM? All right, any moment now. It's doing its thing.
Already set up like that. I would just wrap it up and then add those extra boxes.
Okay, there I go, got that. So.
If we can just take off a couple boxes and put them on another pallet, it's not that big a deal.
Doug, so you in the attic?
He looks like he's in an attic.
I'm in my upstairs dungeon office.
You're in your dungeon, right?
I've been trying to figure out like what it is, how your seating situation is, because I see beams. I couldn't tell if you're in a basement or.
No, we have an upstairs loft that I kind of confiscated and turned into a little classroom section, so that way nobody bugs me usually.
I just noticed the stairs.
Yeah.
So I gave it away.
Yep.
Okay, so let's finish up the reading on the last page. So directory services, this is often accomplished by Active Directory, which is actually Microsoft Active Directory, which has been available since Server 2000. We talked about earlier versions of the NT operating system. Remember, we talked about NT 3.1, 3.5, 3.5.1, NT 4. And then when they renamed it to 2000, and we said that was kind of a big deal. It was a huge improvement over everything before. It was a huge improvement over the two competing operating systems that we had before, which were NT4 and Windows 95, 98 Millennium. So it was a big deal over the 95 9X kernel because it was a much more stable kernel. It allowed your applications to run independently of the operating system. So if an application crashed, it doesn't crash your operating system. And that's especially important on a server. So they did make a server version of 2000. All of our server versions were, believe it or not based on the 9X kernel. So the server operating systems were always based on the NT operating system in the Windows world. But what they did with 2000 is they introduced Active Directory, and that was a big deal because Active Directory uses a relational database. Before Active Directory, back in the days of NT4 and earlier servers, they used a completely flat database. And you had to make separate, if you had separate domains, you had to make these complex trust relationships between them. Is Richard running?
Sorry, was that?
Sorry,
flat?
Richard, do you need it?
Guys, did you hear? Was it flat or flap?
Flat, F-L-A-T. So Richard, do you need it into the Zoom? Oh yeah, sorry, I see two people waiting. Apologize for that, Jonathan and you. All right, okay, you should be it down. Okay, bye. Okay. Okay, bye. Sorry guys, I missed two people. So Windows 2000 introduced a hierarchical directory service. So they replaced the flat domain structure, which in order to make that work, it was limited on the number of objects. So we talk about the objects, those are users, computers, servers, printers that you control within Active Directory. So with a flat database, you're kind of limited on the number. So if you wanted to make NT4 and you wanted to use it around the world, you had to create all these separate domains, and then you had to join them together with what we call non-transitive trust. So you could end up having a whole mesh of trust relationships. When 2000 came about, it was a hierarchical, and we can see that when we use, we'll get into it again, when we use the Active Directory tools. And Mike, you got to play with them a little bit. This is why we have all of these containers. So if we had Active Directory and it was, let's say, used for something really big, maybe airports or something like that around the world, you can create organizational units for different geographical areas. You can also do them as like an organizational chart. So it's a matter of how you design the Active Directory. But if you're using Active Directory for a very, very large network, especially something that's international, you have to go to this type of hierarchical type directory service. And what that means is you can create an organizational unit that would be local to your area. So if you had a airport in Los Angeles, one in New York, one in Paris, the users would be logging, they would have their information local. So they wouldn't have to go across the wide area network to authenticate. But if they did need to authenticate in another country, then they could still do that. They can do that by the fact that it is a hierarchical database, then it would just simply authenticate through another location. But commonly, you're going to have most people authenticate in the local area that they're operating in. So again, it says here, this authentication thing is accomplished by Active Directory or in Linux, LDAP, or 389 directory server. So 389 would be the LDAP port. So it does use a port. And let's see, all of these options are built into LDAP compliant. So Active Directory is LDAP compliant, fortunately. And as we've said over and over again, it means that other directory services like Linux-based ones or Novell or whoever could be designed to work with them because they have the same underlying protocol. LDAP is a standard protocol for accessing an existing directory. So if you had a directory services that didn't use LDAP, then making it work would be much more difficult. The mechanisms of LDAP dictate some basic requirements for any directory it accesses. So there's a lot of commonality in how directory services are configured, regardless of the software used. So you're going to have an LDAP server. Microsoft's each of the Windows machines is going to have its LDAP client built in so that it can access services. And we do that to be able to make a Windows 10 machine be able to access LDAP. We have to join it to the domain. And to join it to the domain, we have to have the credentials to do that. So only somebody that's an administrator can join a Windows 7, Windows 10, or whatever computer to a domain, because we don't want anybody to be able to do that because that's part of our security. By default, Active Directory uses Kerberos protocol. So that is the authentication protocol that it uses. I think Kerberos is one of those Greek mythical characters that has 3 heads, if I'm not mistaken, which we'll learn about shortly. However, LDAP can use, Active Directory can use LDAP or use both side by side. Okay, so it's using both LDAP and it's using Kerberos for authentication. It's a little confusing as to the way it's put it there. All right, so we'll get back to, let me see if by,
regarding the LDAP.
what was that?
I have a question regarding the LDAP.
Sure.
So LDAP is, to my understanding, just a protocol that works along with Active Directory, or this is completely separate?
No, it works along with Active Directory. Basically, Active Directory is built on LDAP.
So Brian,
So
is this a WAN? This network setup? Because I came in a little late on when you were discussing this.
Is it a what?
Like a LAN or a WAN?
It could be, actually, that's a good question. Yeah, it really doesn't have anything to do with that per se. There'll be different aspects of network we're talking about here. So it can definitely run on a LAN or a WAN. Remember I said Active Directory could work for a global company like an airline or something like that. So your servers could be geographically located all around the world. But it's not WAN or LAN technology. You need either your LAN or your WAN infrastructure already set up to get this to work. So you have to have WAN communicate. If we're talking about doing Active Directory across the world, we'd have to have that WAN infrastructure already set up. So that when we set up our servers now, that communication part is already done. So you might say when we're talking about the OSI model, we want those first two or three layers already set up and working in order to be able to set up our directory services. Because if somebody's logging into a server and it is locally, it's on the LAN, but if they're logging in and they have to log into another geographical area, then that WAN has to be set up as well. Now, for the most part, what we're going to be doing here in the classroom or at home, of course, is on a LAN. But the exact same things apply if you're on a WAN. That help? Because it's easy to confuse things, you know, if we're talking about topology, if we're talking about subnetting, if we're talking about Active Directory, all of these things are different aspects and they all need to work, but they're different parts of the puzzle. So I definitely need my subnets to work if I'm doing a wide area network.
So Brian, the LDAP will not work without having Access Directory.
Right,
Standalone?
it's a component of Active Directory is built on LDAP. Yes, it would. So yes, to answer that question, it would not
So
work.
Brian, is it universal, like country to country, like going from here to Europe or?
Well, as far as Active Directory, it's designed because it's a hierarchical, you know, so we could make organizational units for different countries. You know, the same way we do, not to confuse it, but the same way we do with the internet, where we make different domains, FR for France, DE for Germany,
Oh,
you know, UK for the United Kingdom. Similar idea to that. Also with area codes, and we have different area codes. You know, it's a little screwed up now with cell phones, but different area codes so that when you dial somebody, you're dialing into a different area. This is how communication needs to be done to speed things up. By hierarchical, it means you're actually logging into a certain area. So if you have a massive database, rather than your computer having to check through every record, with a hierarchical one, you're only logging into an area of that database, so it speeds things up. So again, with the phone system, all the phone numbers are a database, but if we're logging into an 805 number, when you dial and it goes into the phone switching system, it doesn't have to look through the entire world to figure out where to make your connection for your phone call. It's
because
going to
that's
make
versus like the old AOL dial-up days, like in the 90s and early 2000s, when you were going from, was it like location to location with
well, it actually,
phone call?
yeah, no, it's been around since then. If we're talking about the internet naming conventions, it's been around since the late 60s, because the internet was developed by the Department of Defense. It was developed by DARPA. So we got this because of our tax dollars, because our tax dollars were put in, are paying for our military defense. That money, that technology was later shared to universities who worked on that back in the Cold War, and then it actually was eventually came to the public. So, okay, let me see if we're back in business as far as my computers.
Well, anyway, thanks for explaining that.
Sure, I hope we didn't confuse it too much. These are advanced topics. I mean, these are important as far as getting into the network. And one of the things that Active Directory not only relies on one open technology, LDAP, it relies on another open technology, and that is DNS. So it relies on both of those technologies in order to function correctly. And that becomes a big thing. having your DNS work correctly. Let me shut down this Windows 10 one because I don't really need it right. I don't really need it right now,
Did she
but I do need the server one running. So let me stop and restart that one again. And isn't that a funny thing? Has anybody ever seen this before? It says Guru Meditation.
No, never seen that.
It's going through Guru Meditation right now. That is funny. That must be a programmer that put in like an Easter egg or something.
Where do you see that at?
Let me see if can I make this larger? Right down here, the one that's highlighted in blue, the one that I was trying to get to run.
Oh, I see.
Right under below it, it says it's going through Guru Meditation. Oh, that is bizarre. That's really funny. And I have, there it is. It's going through. The reason it's not doing anything is going through Guru Meditation right now. Okay, so I'm going to power it off, try to start that one back up while we continue on. So when we promote the server, we have to run a certain type of DNS, and that's called Active Directory Integrated DNS. Because normally a DNS would not have any information about your Active Directory. So Active Directory shares that information with DNS. And this is why we can't use the Google one, because all of our objects within Active Directory depend on there being records within the DNS to point to let all the computers on your network know how to get to those objects. So it needs to go to get to the object that represents your user, so you can log in, things like that. So that is all dependent on DNS, but it has to be the Active Directory integrated DNS. So you have to create a local DNS within your network. Somebody had a question?
Yeah, we were setting up the DNS yesterday, and I noticed it was the 127 IP, which is the loopback, right?
Correct, yes.
So you must have it set up as the local in order to set up the Active Directory?
Yes, you have to set it up locally. And you might, if you're thinking ahead, you might say that's going to involve.
Wait, don't click that, read that. That was from Guru Meditation.
Oh, it was from Guru Meditation?
It was.
Oh, man.
You missed it.
It said something about a critical error. I was trying to read it.
Yeah, I was
did.
trying
Sorry, I
to
clicked
too.
on it. I
I
think
guess
I need to delete that one. I think this is my working one. This is my working one right here. I'm deleting.
we'll see it in the recording, I guess.
Yeah, you guys will see it in the recording.
Rewind it, rewind it.
Yeah, don't say anything where I have to edit the recording so I can get it up quickly.
I promise I won't. I'll curb my profanity.
Okay, all right, good. Good job. All righty.
As hard as that is.
Okay, I'm not saying anything.
No dirty words like trash can or mud.
That's right.
How about grunge?
Grunge is okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's better. If I pick the right, I need to delete out that other VM. Okay, so we'll go with the server again. Brings up server. This is server 2012, 2016. Basically looks virtually identical, and 2019 hasn't changed that much either. As I said, a lot of the focus has been within Hyper-V. All right, so in here, did we promote it or not? I think we finished promoting. If we promoted it, I should have the Active Directory tools. So if I click on tools here, you can see now all of a sudden I have these tools. So this is the giveaway. If I promoted it to Active Directory, I'm going to have a new set of administrative tools in there. And these are my Active Directory tools. So this is a new tool that came about in 2012, Active Directory Administrative Center. And this to me is kind of like the way Windows 10 is going to the settings and so forth. This is a new type of a new look to the administrative tools, where these other ones are the more traditional user tools. So you see a lot of us tend to use these ones down here, but this one will do the same thing. One of the things this will do that the other ones won't is allow you to enable the Active Directory recycle bin. Prior to Windows Server 2012, the enabling the recycle bin was a big deal because you had to go through a lot of scripting in order to enable it. Now in 2012, you can just go into the Active Directory Administrative Center and just click a button to enable it. It is a one-way thing. If you do enable it, you can't unenable it. I don't know if that is a big deal or not, but just to let you know, if you enable the Active Directory recycle bin. So the recycle bin is just kind of like a recycle bin we're familiar with in deleting files and folders. It gives us the option to bring them back again. The difference here is these are Active Directory objects and containers now.
So if you were to empty the recycle bin on this Active Directory, can you get anything back?
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, I was just curious, like, you know,
I don't know. I'm not sure. We can
you know, like on Windows, when you do it, you can go to a disk doctor to get it back.
Yeah, it is a lot different now. Now we have usually it kind of goes to a backup. Then, you know, we have to go through an Active Directory restore mode to do that. Mm-hmm.
Brian,
So,
yesterday in 2000, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yesterday in 2008, I had to go and manually add in a tool. I forget through what it was, but I had to enable something. And you're saying that is no longer the case. It's provided to you in this 2012 edition?
I don't know if we're talking about the same tool. What I was talking about here is the recycle bin. Yeah, it was a big deal to add it in 2008. It's very simple to add it in 2012. So Microsoft made that feature much simpler to add. I can't recall specifically what feature I had you add. If I can remember.
It was alongside something Active Directory.
I think we may have just been adding an a snap into an MMC.
Okay, so it was in the MMC, yes. It was a snap and it was a particular one that I had to enable. So this has nothing to do with these set of tools that you have open right now.
Well, you can put any of these tools into your own custom MMC. So that hasn't changed from 2008 to 2012. You still have the ability to customize it. However, 2012 has this, you can see this whole new interface here that doesn't exist in 2008. It has this server manager. Well, there is a server manager in 2008, but it looks completely different. But there is also this Active Directory Admin Center now, which we sometimes just shorthand call that the ADAC. If I say ADAC, that's what I'm referring to, the Admin Center right here.
Would you say 2012 is simpler than the 2008 because of the GUI?
I would say no, it's not simpler, it's not harder. It does work, it does have the features now where you can group servers together. If you're running Microsoft Hyper-V, if you're doing a lot of virtualization, it certainly adds more manageability functions for that. Okay. But if you're not using Hyper-V, let's say you're virtualizing in VMware instead, then really you're not going to take the advantage of these tools. You're going to use your VMware tools instead. And the VMware answer to this is called vCenter. Hopefully when we get a copy of that, we have ordered a new VMware with a new vCenter, but I don't think we'll get it for about a month or so. I'll have Rafi demo that, And next week, I'm going to try and get him, well, he's going to have to demo the free version of ESXi. So you can take a look at that. The difference between the free version and the paid version is the paid version has a tool called vCenter, which allows you to centrally manage all of your different virtual servers. And this is what Microsoft is trying to do with Hyper-V in here, trying to make it so you can centrally see your different virtual servers. All right, so let's go over to the traditional tool that we typically use over here, and that is Active Directory users and computers. We use this one all the time, whether it be server 2003, 2008, 2012, 16, or 19. And this has got a nice, although maybe quaint, dated look to it. At the very top right here, you can see it says Active Directory users and computers. And right here, you see where it says vase.local. That is the domain. So that is a container. There are two types of objects within LDAP or active. When I say Active Directory, we're talking about LDAP. More generically, we're talking about LDAP. There are two types of containers. There is the domain itself. You can see if I click on the domain contains all of these other containers right here. And what are these containers called? What's the name for these containers?
Organizational unit.
Yeah, organizational units, and sometimes we just shorten that to OU. So yes, they're organizational units, and we'll typically just refer to them as OUs.
And the other side is called what?
There are OUs over here and over here. This is just when, if I unexpand this right here, you can see it shows it over in the other pane. That's just a view.
Okay.
So this is just duplicating what's over here. This is a tree view over here, and then this would be your expanded view right here. You get this. You can have this kind of view in Windows files too.
I've always just looked at the tree view, not whatever the
Okay.
file.
So yeah. So that's why we have the tree view over here. And some of these are obviously, these ones are all pre-made organizational units. And you'll find all of your computers. I was going to add one, but I couldn't get the Windows 10 to cooperate on me. But if I added a computer, it would show up in here by default. Now, sometimes, let's say you have lots and lots of computers. Sometimes you don't want to use the built-in one. Maybe, you have computers in New York and Los Angeles and St. Louis or something like that. And maybe you want to create organizational units for those. So, maybe in here, I'll right click on it and go down to new. And then you can see the different types of objects I can create. And right here is an option for organizational units. So I might put in, let's say, if I'm doing it geographically, if I could spell that right, I could make, I could make one of my organizational units for that. Now, I can also use Active Directory in a tiny company as well. And I may not even need to make any organizational units, or I just make one for, let's say I don't want to use users. Maybe I want to have employees, and then maybe I want to have supervisors or something like that. So I'm even in a small company, just for organizational purposes, I may create multiple OUs just to make it easier for me to identify who is who. You notice down here, there is a checkbox, protect container from accidental deletion. If you later go to try to delete it, if you leave that checked, you won't be able to delete it. It'll warn you. It's probably a good idea to leave that checked so that it makes it harder to delete. Because how often, when you create an organizational unit, are you actually going to want to delete it? probably once you've got things done, you probably got them pretty much set in stone unless your company gets sold or merged with another company. But apart from that, you're when you've decided on your how you want your organizational unit set. And let's say within New York now, I want new, and maybe I want to make one for my users, and then maybe I want one for the computer objects. So I can do new, I'm going to create another organizational unit. So I'll do one for users. So I've got that under there. And if I'm going to do one under there, I'm probably going to do more than one, right? Usually doesn't make much sense to just have one. So then I'll create another organizational unit under here. And let's say I'm going to make that computers. So now in New York, I can just simply look through this and see who my users are in New York and what computers are that I'm managing there. And then I could add other geographical locations. So you can see the beauty of this hierarchical system is you can manage very, very large networks now. So I could add in other areas. I can also do it instead of, if I'm a company that's maybe not geographically located all over the place, I might do it by different types of roles. You know, I may have OU for administrators, one for staff, one for other types of employees and so forth, and do it more like an organizational chart. So that is a nice thing about this. You can see all of these other ones were built in, and domain controllers right here. Because I promoted my server as a domain controller, it shows up here. If I do a second one now, and I say use existing forest, use existing domain, what's going to happen when I finish promoting that one, it's going to populate in here as well. So that server will then appear in here. So you'll be able to see how many domain controllers you have. Now that they're not actually all your servers, because not all servers will you promote to domain controllers. But what would you say the minimum number of domain controllers would be in any company?
1 or 2?
Yeah, I would say 2. So that if one fails, you have another one to take over. Or if you have to do maintenance on one, if you have to shut it down and do things with it, you have another one that will log your users in.
Now, when we're talking companies here, do you mean like corporate level size companies?
I could mean any size company, actually. Now, nowadays, if we want 2 domain controllers, we could do that virtually as well. So we could actually run 2 virtual domain controllers on one machine. Now, what would bother me there, of course, if that machine failed, you would lose both of your domain controllers. So that certainly would be a concern. You'd have to trust the hardware more than.
Question.
But, yeah.
Domain controller types.
Mhm.
There's more than one?
You know, this is what I argue with Rafi. There was in the past. There kind of is and isn't now. In the past, you will hear people say there is a PDC and a BDC. A PDC is a primary domain controller, and a BDC is a backup domain controller. But remember, I told you how it changed. There was a big change between NT4 and Windows 2000, which was essentially NT5.
Yes.
Well, they got rid of the need for a PDC and a BDC. what happened in theory, although it's not entirely true, is that each domain controller becomes a peer now. They become equivalent. However, for backward compatibility, there is something called a PDC emulator that has to run in one of the machines. So, and while in theory, there's only one type, in practice, there are 4 different roles that your servers have to support, and you can share those roles with different domain controllers. There's a PDC emulator, a RID master, an infrastructure master, and a schema master. And I don't want to really get into the whole purpose of those right now, but if we want to get more into the weeds, there is a slightly more technical answer. The basic answer is that they're all equivalent. And actually, there's a 5th thing as well. There's something called a global catalog for indexing everything within Active Directory. And what you would do with a global catalog, if I'm assuming each location, let's say around the world, had several domain controllers, one of them would have a global catalog for indexing in each location. And indexing is something databases use to speed up searching. Okay, we'll take a break now. But before we do, I'll see if there are any questions. Any more questions?
I got so much more.
You got so much more?
If
Go ahead.
anybody else has any questions, hop right in.
I have one real quick. What manages Macs? What, like, can they go on these Windows Server managers?
Remember, in Linux or Unix, think of a Mac as a Unix or Linux machine. To connect, it would use Samba. Remember, it's SMB, server message block protocol, that's used to connect to Windows machines. So there is third-party stuff as well to put them into Active Directory. But the Macs themselves, if they were in the old days, I don't think they make a Mac server anymore, but we actually had one, but it would be using LDAP. It would be using LDAP, but the Mac support for LDAP would let you add it into Active Directory. It's just that it would require some third-party stuff. And some of the features of Active Directory that you're using, when we get into things like group policy, obviously it would not apply to the Mac. Okay, that's a good question.
That was a very good question.
Yeah, you could probably get deep into that. And the question would be whether you need to control things the same way on the Mac. Obviously, it would be good to control the authentication and things like that if they're accessing resources on your server. All right, so we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and finish this up, and then I guess we'll probably get to some A+ questions maybe after that. We'll see. Okay.
All right.
All right. Talk to you in a few.
Yeah, so I had a very similar question to that.
You want to ask it?
Sure. So this is Microsoft's solution to
LDAP.
Active Directory server.
Well, Active Directory is Microsoft's name, so it's Microsoft's answer to directory services. Probably one of the most well-known directory services before Active Directory was Novell Directory Services, NDS. And NDS was far superior to anything Microsoft had at the time because, as I said, they had that flat domain structure where all the domains were flat databases and you had to join them through trust relationships. And Microsoft touted that like it was the greatest thing in the world, while at the same time knowing it was completely inferior to things like NDS, and there were a couple other true directory services at the time.
Is SQL any similar to Active Directory, or is it completely different subject?
I'm going to say, I was going to come right out and say no, but on the common side, SQL is a database language. So SQL is a way of writing the databases. And honestly, I couldn't tell you whether SQL's used to create the Active Directory database or not. But SQL is a database language. With SQL, you create your rows and tables and fields for storing data and manipulating data. So some similarity there. And a lot of the Microsoft things will require a SQL database. You know, many different things. I can't think of a specific example at the moment, but I think our video cameras do. They require a SQL database because you have all these different videos that need to be stored and then searched and so forth.
Mhm.
So yeah, there definitely is an overlap there, and I can't give you a definitive answer on that, but yeah, when we're talking about NDS, we're definitely talking about data, the data being user objects for authentication and computers and domain controllers and so forth, and keeping track of them. When we're talking about SQL, generally we're talking about data, you know, whether it be, you know, ordering things through Amazon or something like that, keeping track of information. And it is probably the most common, you know, it's not the only database language, but it's probably the one we think of the most nowadays, because Oracle and Microsoft and Linux, they all have popular SQL databases. There's in the Linux world, there's MySQL, PostgreSQL. In the Microsoft world, there's Microsoft SQL Server. And then in the Oracle world, there's Oracle. I don't know what they're up to now, 12 something or other server. All right, so I'll take a break now, and if you have any more questions, we'll come back in a few. And I'm gonna stop the recording.